heads up on the weekly post this week that'll go out tomorrow for Assembly members. There'll be updates in there on healthcare cost for the borough, motor vehicle registration tax distribution that's dispersed to the RSAs, and a rough timeline and discussion about some upcoming bond sales. Those are probably three things that you might want to review. And if you have questions, you can obviously let us know. And at this time, kind of funny, I would like to invite up our Deputy Director for EMS, Tracy Loscar. We actually had a DES update on EMS and COVID. I want to throw out a caveat. I did not invite Tracy here tonight to talk about everything COVID. What I'd ask her to do is provide an update on EMS operations. Obviously, there's some strains on our healthcare system. So she's here to kind of talk about what's most relevant to us. And as elected officials, your responsibility to provide EMS services to the citizens of the borough. So she's going to talk a little bit about that. And I had a note here to say, if it's desired, I'll be happy to invite DHSS to come in and talk about state policy decisions and whatnot. Sounds like there's no if there. So I will invite them here to hopefully present on the October 5th Assembly meeting. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Tracy for an update tonight and an opportunity for you to ask some questions about kind of what's going on operationally and what that looks like for the borough.
Am I good? Good evening, Mayor and Assembly. Thanks for having me. I'll try to, Director Barkley told me to write a book. I wrote a book. I'm not going to give you the entire book unless you're interested in additional questions. This is specific to how the current spike has affected our operations. It's definitely here. COVID is real, COVID is here, and the Delta variant is the dominant strain here in Alaska. So what it's meant for us is starting in early August and up through mid-August to now, we're looking at an overall 22% increase in our daily operations tempo, which means we've bumped up to about 33 calls per day. That's system-wide, that's through the borough, that's from all reaches. And these are the observations from this spike. Right? We have a statistical increase in overnight call volume. A lot of the COVID complaints are respiratory in nature, so it is normal for people to become acutely short of breath at night in the early mornings hours of the day. So that's not uncommon at all. We've seen an increase in both call volume and severity in the rural regions. Okay, this includes as far as Glacier View, Talkeetna, Trapper Creek, Willow, Caswell, a lot of the areas down Point Mac, Big Lake in COVID positive related cases. A lot of patients are resistant initially to care, or they don't have it, or the symptoms don't subside. There's a very definitive arc to COVID, especially severe COVID. So we're getting them now from further and further out, and they are sicker and requiring more resources, which takes up more time. We're walking into entire households full of COVID, whether it's coming from the children in school, or I don't know where the vectors are coming from, but they're entire households. So the crews are responding to households with 3, 4, 5, 6, as many as 7 people who are COVID positive, some of them acutely ill in the same household, in the same family at the same time. This means there are households with really high viral loads and resulting in a lot of additional decon and time on scene. Starting in September, there is a very distinct increase, and this is important to note, in out-of-hospital death. We see death every single month. You have cardiac arrest from every kind of normal pre-existing condition, trauma, so on and so forth. But statistically, compared to 1 year ago for the same time frame, it is 150% increase. Okay, and it coincides with roughly about a week after Labor Day. Okay. At least 40% of the cases in September are known COVID positive and were symptomatic at the time of collapse, and they fit the ideal, the ages of those patients fit the CDC parameters for severe disease. Let's see, increase in stroke. We know COVID causes clotting. So we've seen a marked increase in stroke calls and symptomology in the last month, 36%, 47% of those cases were in the last week. Let's see. So that's what's going on as far as the patient presentation, and I can certainly answer any specific questions on what they look like, but it's definitely increased our workload. It increases decontamination time. It increases the amount of time the crews are staying in the hospital and in between calls. The increased caseload on the hospital also increases our turnaround time. We want to be able to safely transfer care and then get back in service. The hospital's doing the best they can. They work really, really hard, and their capacity has gone up and down, up and down. Most days we can turn over with no problem, meaning there's a bed immediately available, but we are seeing gradual increases as much as 30 minutes at times. 30 minutes or more where we simply don't have a bed. We do work directly with the hospital and communicate with them pretty much daily to make sure that's decreased. Another operational thing to note is I want to talk about the term status zero. And when we talk about status zero, that is our operational moniker for zero physical resources. When we are status zero, there are no ambulances to respond anywhere. We have a very small percentage on a monthly basis of this happening. And it happens generally from regular surges or sometimes from a large casualty incident. Generally, they resolve very quickly. I will tell you that they have quadrupled for the month of September, and we have spent more time at status zero in September, secondary to the increased caseload, than in the first 6 months of 2021. So that's just something to note. Again, we're working with all of our partners to make sure we get first response vehicles out. We work with the fire departments. We work with within our facility to increase capacity whenever we can, but we can't predict when it's going to happen. We just had another surge today. We were status zero for greater than an hour, and that's with all of our command staff on the road. So it's happening. As far as our responders go, they're actually doing pretty well. They're just really tired. Morale is good. They do all this without any complaint. They're really quite amazing, but they're exhausted. These are long, long days. We're really grateful. The community's been really good with them. We don't, despite all the polarity that is around COVID, going in and out of the houses and the residents, the community's been very, very supportive, and we haven't had any major issues. We adopted PPE early on. We adopted really strict mask and congregate settings, separation, ventilation. We have all kinds of mitigation measures in place. And as a result, 18 months in, EMS has still had no clusters. We have occasional people who've been to, we do get people who contract COVID through contact tracing. Almost every single one of those cases are from outside of work. So yeah, 18 months in and working with COVID every single day, we still have no clusters, but we have really strict mitigation in place. And that includes masks and congregate settings, high ventilation systems. They all have individual PAPRs. We've installed upgraded UV and ventilation systems within the ambulances. One of our crew members even designed a unique negative pressure environment that we can implement for long distance transfers, which means that we don't have to compromise care for rural patients who need what we call aerosol generating procedures. Let's see. Of course, vaccines are encouraged. I encourage them for all of us. Our department does have an 81% vaccination rate. And the other thing I want to mention is I want to say thank you. I want to say a personal thank you. Twice before, I mean, I've been up here a few times now, but at least twice before you've okayed full-time positions for us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Because honestly, if we didn't have the staffing we have right now, this would not be a manageable situation and we'd be in much more dire straits. So I will conclude with that and take any questions on Delta COVID. What do you got? What do you got?
Just a second now. Mr. Sumner is up first, but I have a question. Give the assembly a status update on number of ambulances, how many are moving. When you go to status zero, is it because you're lacking the ambulance or you're lacking the people and things like that?
So personnel, we're doing okay. We have enough authorization to staff 8 full-time ambulances. Again, like we spoke to this last time, staffing is hard everywhere right now. Our operational minimum is 6 full-time ambulances. We have not dropped below operational par at any given time, but depending on the day, sometimes for 12 or 24 hours, we're either at 6, 6.5, 7, 7.5, and sometimes 8. We're approaching 8 now. We are in the middle of a hiring right now. If all goes well, we should have enough staffing for 8 in an academy by November 1st. That's our plan. And I know I just jinxed it, but that's our plan.
How many ambulances are in for maintenance or not operable at this time?
For us?
Yes.
Oh, none.
None.
I don't believe we may have one. We have one for trans right now. I think one out for having a trans look at. We do have 18 ambulances total throughout the service. So as far as physical vehicles, we have surge capacity. It's personnel.
Okay.
Right.
Mr. Sumner's first.
Through the mayor, I was wondering if you could give us some of those figures in absolute terms. So you said we have 4 times the zero resources available. What's a,
So I did it
how
by
often does
occurrence.
that happen in a typical month?
Okay,
And
so
then-
I did it by occurrence right now versus time. Sometimes, so what a status zero, and I should have explained it a little better, is no physical resources that are going to be available within 5 to 10 minutes. So if we get down to zero and we know there's no ambulance at the hospital doing decon, we consider that zero because we don't know when they're going to become available. Sometimes status zero is only about 10, 15 minutes until one of those vehicles can get to the hospital. Sometimes it can exceed 30 minutes or even an hour. We rarely hit an hour until now. We hit it greater than an hour today, and last week we hit greater than an hour at least once. It's been the first time basically since I've been tracking these stats. So by occurrences, January there was 1, February there was none, March and April were 4 each, that's for the month. May and June, 1, July, 3, so it doesn't happen very often at all. But we're 3 weeks into September, and including today, we're at 11 with this extended time. So statistically, it's a huge jump for us running out of resources.
And then I didn't quite hear, you quoted 150% figure for,
For hard number, you want a hard number for out-of-hospital death?
well, actually I was asking, was that out of hospital death or was that calls for?
Out-of-hospital death, confirmed deaths.
And how many is that? Sorry.
No, that's okay. I only compared, for those numbers, right, I compared a very distinct period of time. So for September, for the month of September in 2020, we had 6, which is what I would expect, right? All elderly except for 1. From September 1st to September 19th, we've had 15 with 6 of them confirmed. Like we knew COVID, and there's at least 2 more that we strongly suspect based on what the family said they complained of, excuse me, prior to collapse. So, yeah.
Okay, now calmly and gentlemanly, okay.
Hey, Mayor, I'm always calm. I just ask good
Let's
questions, okay?
Let's make it extra
now-
calm tonight, extra
Now,
calm.
look, you just said that 19% of the providers do not have not been vaccinated.
That's correct.
Why?
A portion of them had COVID already, so they're waiting on their antibodies. They got tested for antibodies and they already have them. And then a smaller portion at this time, they're just opted not to get it right now. We don't
So,
mandate it.
now wait a minute. What is your policy about people not having the vaccination being on duty?
We don't have a policy against it right now.
So everybody could not have a vaccination and be on duty, right?
That's correct.
So that means that vaccinations are worthless, right?
That does not.
No, wait, Mayor.
Just calm down.
That's a
now, just
good
calm down.
question. Answer it.
I don't understand.
The manager.
Mr.
Mr.
I
McKee,
will
Mr.
ask
McKee,
it.
the manager's going to take this one, please.
I will ask it again.
Manager's going to answer it.
Okay.
No, wait. I want to hear a really good answer from you then, okay?
Okay, now calmly and gentlemanly, okay, Mr. Manager.
Through the mayor to Mr. McKee, the fact that we are not mandating a vaccine does not speak to the efficacy of vaccines. It simply is a policy decision at this time to not require that of borough employees.
So that means that, in fact, the vaccines do not have value. Is that it?
Through the mayor to Mr. McKee, just because we don't have a policy requiring vaccines does not mean that they're not effective. It simply means we don't have a policy to mandate that for borough employees.
So what does it take? An edict from God to get you to get something like that?
Through the mayor to Mr. McKee, it might be an edict from the Biden administration,
But
that hasn't
don't
happened.
get him
Actually-
going, Mr. Manager. Okay, Ms. Nowers, you're
Okay.
up next. Okay, Ms. Nowers, please.
I just had a question about impact on staff, and I think you answered it. And it sounds like fortunately, you haven't had a big impact on staffing in terms of COVID positive or
Correct.
quarantining. Do you have any sort of numbers on that? You just said you haven't had any clusters.
We've had no clusters. We've had, I believe, 8 cases total in 18 months.
That's good.
So And if I just want to add one thing to it for the quarantine, the vaccination status for us, along with CDC and DHSS, does make a difference. If you're a close contact or you're exposed and you're not vaccinated, the difference is they have to quarantine longer and be monitored for symptoms. And that's just for us.
Okay, Mr. Yount,
you.
please.
Oh, where do I start? So first of all, thank you for, as a freedom-loving American, not mandating it. I got members in my own home who have the vaccine and those that don't. And as the leader of my own home, I actually feel like I should leave that decision to them and their healthcare provider. So you said earlier, the hospitalizations, about 85% of them were people who don't have it. I actually think it's more than that. And I read that it was 29-1. So that would put it more in the high 90s. But again, there's no debating the fact that the vaccine helps. There's no debating that. I also don't think we should be debating if it's mandated or not, or if it's because it's not mandated. I really wish we just didn't even talk about this. I don't know. That's it. That's all I got.
Very good.
I don't want to disagree with Mr. Smolden's numbers, because obviously he's more connected than I am, but I do agree with you. The numbers, the broad numbers report 96 to 97% are unvaccinated with severe symptoms. Yeah. Mhm.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Hale, you're okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't have a question. I just wanted to say that I thought that our emergency services personnel were doing a heck of a job with all this, and I just wanted to thank them for doing what they do.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hale, and thank you, ma'am, coming in. We appreciate it.
Okay.
Mr. Manager?
All right, so I'll wrap up comments by saying thanks to Tracy, and I do agree with her comment. Like when we talk about the assembly and its role in resource allocation, and I wasn't here during that time, but when those full-time positions were approved for EMS and we migrated away from an on-call system, I think it put us in a position to get through this pandemic in a way that would have been a very different outcome had that step not had already been taken. So for what it's worth, I think the assembly made a really good decision in that adjustment, and it came at a very good time, because who would have known that this was going to be our current reality. And then secondly, the same, thanks to our first responders. It's amazing what they're dealing with. I listened to the Dave Wallace presentation from Matsu Regional today at the chamber as well. And it does seem, there's a lot of strain on the system was my general takeaway, but it seems like those frontline workers, first responders, healthcare workers, are answering the call and the task. I mean, we got a lot of great folks in our community, and it's encouraging to see them and their work and what they're doing to support our community. So it's a good way just to recognize their efforts and their ability to sustain this over time. I don't think anyone foresaw it going on this long or having these multiple surge periods, but we did want to provide the assembly an update on kind of what is our component to this system and supporting the community. So hopefully this has been a helpful update. If you have specific information requests or there are other topics you want to scratch at, let me know and we'll try to provide that to you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Manager. Mr. Stropoulos, you're up.
At the last meeting, I briefed the assembly, gave you an overview of the potential opioid settlement that was heading our way. The state of Alaska informed us they have signed on. And so now the 9 largest municipalities in Alaska are all going to be either joining into the settlement or not. Again, this is nationwide opioid litigation. It's a net $22.5 billion allocated by population nationwide. Because of Alaska's low population, we're getting just under 1/4%, which equates to $58 million spread over 18 years. Of that amount, 15% is to go to municipalities in some way, shape, or form. And so at the next meeting, you'll have a resolution before you to approving the manager entering into the settlements. Settlements are online. They're over 300 pages each. There's 2 settlements going forward right now. There may be more coming. It does not turn out to be a lot of money, and we're going to be having discussions with the state of Alaska regarding either setting up a advisory board or some kind of board to talk about with both municipalities and state representatives to talk about spending the money over the next 2 decades. 85% of it needs to be used for opioid remediation. And so when you think about the borough and the borough's powers, we do have the ability to accept pass-through grants from the state of Alaska. So that would be one good thing. And then we could pass that through to other providers. We also, of course, have our own power for education, first responder responses, treatments, things like overdose prevention and overdose treatment, things of that nature. So that's just a broad category. It is a very major issue for a lot of municipalities. I don't believe any municipality in the state of Alaska joined the lawsuit to begin with. And so we're just kind of all along for the ride. It is a class action settlement. So it's not like we have any negotiating power, which is why it's coming via resolution. It's basically thumbs up or thumbs down. So if you have any questions about specific details, you can give me a holler, but it's got to be contained in the IM
So
that's coming forward.
the total settlement was how much?
Well, the total settlement is $26 billion.
How much of that was attorney fees?
$2.1 billion. Billion.
Wow, I gotta reactivate my lawyer license.
Yeah.
Question for the attorney.
Okay, please.
Let's see, we get what, about $8 million a year for tobacco things, okay? We're supposed to get rid of tobacco, all of our stuff. So going back to this, how much that we're gonna get is going to be used actually for people who have problems with the opioids, or is it going to be used for a general fund, general screw-up?
85% of the money we would get out of this must be used for opioid remediation. All municipalities and states nationwide are going to have to file an annual report. Part of what this settlement funds is an oversight committee that's going to be in existence for the next 2 decades, comprised of various states attorneys general, state health officials, plus the manufacturers and distributors to review and audit people for their expenditures. So ultimately, how the money gets distributed across the state does involve a conversation. We've had very good discussions with Health and Human Services here and Attorney General's office. It'll depend on how many municipalities in Alaska participate, but 85% must be spent on opioid remediation, whereas the tobacco, that's an excise tax that we levy on cigarettes. So that's up to the assembly.
Okay, thank you.
That's all I have.
You want to tell them about Charlie Nash case? Is there anything, no updates there yet? Okay, good. Okay, Madam Clerk.
The clerk's report is in your red folder. It has, of course, the upcoming meetings and the quasi judicial report. And for the members who haven't seen it, the voting board on this side is down. It's not working. So we just have this one tonight. Yep, over here.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. Any comments on the citizens and other correspondence? Got 4 items there. Hearing none, they are presented. Madam Clerk, the IMs, please.
IM 21-194, informing the assembly of the manager renewing the commercial use permit with Co-Alaska Incorporated for the use of borough-owned land and improvements within the Port McKenzie Special Use District located within Section 22, Township 14 North, Range 4 West, Seward Meridian, for a term of not more than 18 months. IM 21-200, informing the assembly of the manager's signature on 5 grant applications for submission to the Alaska State Division of Libraries, Archives, and Museums Easy American Rescue Plan Act Grants for Libraries Grant Program.
Okay, any comments on the IMs? Here none, the IMs are presented as read by the clerk. There are no persons to be heard. We have reached public hearings for our ordinances tonight. You will have 3 minutes to testify for people who are testifying by telephone. Once you hear the item you wish to speak to read into the record, please hit *3 and you will hear your hand has been raised. You will know it's your time to speak when you hear your line has been unmuted. Then state your name for the record and spell your last name, please, if you're telephonic. Okay, Madam Clerk, ordinance 21-090.
An ordinance amending the bid protest and appeal procedure by adopting amendments to MSB 3.08342 bid protest and appeal procedures. If you're on the phone and would like to speak to this, press *3.
Staff report, is this Mr. Spropoulos?
Mr. Mayor, members of the Assembly, this is being brought to you to amend our bid protest and appeal procedures to more closely align with the federal and state procedures. When the borough has bid protests, our code was written sometime before 1994, and it's ambiguous as to what the powers of the hearing officer are. Under the laws of both the federal and the state courts, if you are a successful bid protester on a bid protest, what you are entitled to as a measure of damages is your bid preparation costs. You're not entitled to get the contract. You're not entitled to lost profits. What often happens in our experience, or let me speak personally over the past 16 years of being here, is that major projects, when they're coming forward, are often on tight timelines, and a bid protest can really mess up our timelines. The most recent one we had, it was Sioux Valley Houston High School, or middle school, which will be the high school, I should say. And a bid protest was filed. It delayed the project by 6 weeks because of the ambiguity in our code about whether or not a project can be awarded or not. What this will do is change our code, but not anything unique. It will align it with both the Code of Federal Regulations and the Alaska statutes that allow for a contract to be awarded and go forward, even if a bid protest is going. So that determination would be made either by the purchasing officer, or in the case where a contract is over $100,000, it's got to come before the assembly anyway. So the power to decide whether or not a project would go forward in the face of a bid protest ultimately would be made by the assembly on a major project. If the purchasing officer makes a determination that there would be no impact to delay, then the whole project would get delayed just as it currently is pending a bid protest. Over the years, we've had bid protests related to schools, major road projects, fire stations, and with the short construction season, we're always trying to get these through purchasing and administration, always trying to get these projects out, in April, May. Bid protests can start to chew up into the summertime construction season. And so this code revision here today is to do that. It also specifies, and if you look at the information memorandum, it quotes the Alaska Supreme Court cases that talk about what a bidder is entitled to get on a successful bid protest. So that codifies that. And it also clarifies that the people who are entitled to file a bid protest must have an economic stake in the outcome. And in the past, since the bid protest that we had that we resolved in our favor back in June, one of the other things that's happening is there's a potential for all these federal programs to start coming through. One of the things that the federal programs require is that our purchasing code match the federal code. This will do that as well. So it'll streamline any type of federal money coming through in the event that things start rolling forward. We don't have to worry about any discrepancies between our codes.
Okay, thanks for the staff report. It was a good one. Okay, I'll open the public hearing at this time. Do we have a sign-up list? Madam Clerk says no sign-up list. Anybody in the audience wish to speak to this ordinance? Any telephonics? Last chance. Okay, I'll close the public hearing, and Assemblywoman Knowles is going to make this motion, please.
I move to adopt ordinance 21-090, and I do have a question on it.
Okay, go ahead, and then Mr. Yon, I think, wants to.
And I apologize if I didn't see it in the IM. I'm wondering just roughly how many protests we get a year, and if you have a sense of how many of those would fall into the category of under 100,000.
Mr. Spropoulos?
Probably, I would look to the purchasing officer. I would say we get a bid protest once every 2 years, maybe 3. And I don't recall any under $100,000.
Mr. Kraft, do you want to come forward and?
I would defer to Mr. Kraft.
Yeah, we'll let him come on forward to the mic.
Sometimes he handles bid protests without them going through appeal, because sometimes they get resolved at the purchasing officer level.
To Assemblymember Nowers through the mayor. They tend to come in waves. I would say that on average, we get 2 or 3 a year at the most. But as the attorney said, most of those we resolve at a very low level when the initial protest comes in. A lot of it is just clarifying the process, explaining what's going on, or explaining why a decision was made. The protest itself isn't really what is going to derail anything, because I'm under obligation to respond to that within 3 days. So we can continue moving forward. It's when the bidder or the proposer disagrees or doesn't align with what my response is, at that point, then it goes into an appeal. That's what really drags the process out.
Okay, Mr. Yon, thank you,
Thank
Mr. Kraft. Maybe stand close, yeah, stand by.
Administratively, I think this is a great idea. Would it be possible, though, I mean, we know what caused this one and I think we made the right decision, but could we change it so that in the future, people could bring the packages in and deliver by hand again? Where we could do them electronically and by hand. I know we've talked about this briefly in the past, but I think we would have had no debate on this one. We would have never had the 6-week delay. And I'm glad to hear that potentially if this passes in the future, we won't have more delays because we do have a very short construction season here, so.
So what is the procedure now, Mr. Kraft?
To the mayor, to Assemblymember Yunt, I actually have draft legislation that I sent up to the attorney to clarify the procedure. So when COVID first hit, prior to COVID, everything was done in person, face to face. When COVID came along, we shifted over to using an electronic submittal and distribution system. There's been a big benefit from that. The number of bids that we're getting, the word is getting out. We're getting a lot more bids in response, a lot more people. We looked at this because the concern was relayed to me about wanting to do both of them. We think we have a solution. The challenge is that by code, I have to have one clock that determines whether it is on time or late. So as long as I can have a clock that is tied into our computer system, which also drives the clock with Bonfire, and those are synced, then I can at that point take a physical package in, stamp it in, and make sure. Timeliness is huge in government contract.
Yeah, so more of a hybrid model. I like the electronic system because it is going to bring in more bids, especially from contractors, you know, close to here that maybe don't want to drive out, but the old school way of being able to let them walk in. So yeah, if you guys are working on a hybrid model, that'd be awesome. And I know it'll take time to roll out, but it would alleviate situations like this.
Right.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kraft. We appreciate that. Any further discussion? Any objection to passing this ordinance 21090? Mr. Hale and Ms. Bovee, any objection?
No objection.
Okay, hearing no objection from anyone, that ordinance passes. Madam Clerk, 21091.
An ordinance amending portions of MSB 3.2A to change the threshold for contiguous local improvement districts from 70% to 60%. If you're on the phone and would like to speak to this, press *3.
Okay, who's doing the staff report on? Mr. Sprapas, two in a
Attorney
row,
Knight.
go ahead.
I'll give the brief staff report. I drafted this legislation at the request of Assemblymember Sumner to change the threshold. Local improvement districts are physical improvements that attach to real property that are then paid for by the taxpayers whose properties gets benefited. Typical local improvement districts that the borough has done for decades have been paving, that is paving the roads that already exist, or running natural gas. State law allows LIDs to be implemented with a vote of 50% of the properties to be improved. And for some period of time, we were at 50% here in the borough. Years and years and years ago, that limit got raised to 70%. You had a few LIDs here before you about a month and a half ago, and some of them failed. Assemblymember Sumner asked that this be drafted to lower our borough voting requirement down to 60%. And for the Assembly's information, we do two types of LIDs. This would be for contiguous LIDs. That is where all the lots touch each other. If you wanted to do a non-contiguous LID where everybody agreed they would get taxed and the guy in the middle doesn't have to pay it all, that threshold is still at 100%. So this only affects the non-contiguous LIDs.
Okay,
I'm sorry, contiguous LIDs.
thank you. Good report. Okay, I'll open the public hearing at this time. Madam Clerk is shaking her head. No sign-up list. Anybody in the audience wish to speak to this? Any telephonics? One telephonic, so go ahead on the telephone, please.
Hi, this is Tammy Alexander, ALEXANDER. I would like to see this motion passed. We have tried for several years and been the majority of our neighborhood would like to get natural gas. And we have only been like 1 or 2 away from the 70%, but we just cannot get there. And it's the majority of us that want it. So I'd like to see this motion passed. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you for calling in. Any other telephonics? Anybody in the audience wish to speak on this? So I'll close the public hearing at this time. Assemblymember Sumner, this is yours.
I move to adopt ordinance 21-091, and I'd speak to it. So the 70% threshold was kind of just arbitrarily set. I believe it was actually an at the table amendment last time this came before the assembly. But I think it's especially for the larger LID projects, it's a pretty onerous level to reach, because it's not 70% of the return ballots having to vote yes. You have to get 70% of the lot owners to return a ballot and vote yes. And a lot of folks, when they get their ballot mailed, just may not return it. I mean, to reach this threshold on any of the larger LIDs is nearly impossible. And we actually had one that came before us with like 69 point something percent before. And I really think that we have a strong interest in promoting these LID projects. We put $1 million in reserve so that we can self-fund them. And I think that this would be a good thing to do.
Yes. Mr. Yant.
This is a great idea, but I want to ask Nick, you had said earlier the state statute is 50%.
Yeah, the minimum by state statute is 50%. So in other words, if you didn't get 50% of the people to vote on it, then the borough assembly could not institute it.
Yeah, and I've helped get a few of these through in the past, and building on what Jesse said, it's the hard part is getting people to actually return the ballot. So even 50% could mean a drastically higher amount of people want it. They just maybe weren't there, didn't return the ballot, something happened. I mean, I could see why the 50 seems fair. That's for sure half, and it could be more. So I'm gonna bring an at the table amendment and ask that we move this to 50% to match the state guidelines.
Okay, so we have an amendment on the floor. Madam Clerk?
I just wanted to clarify real quick, if I could, Mr. Mayor, and ask Mr. Spropoulos a question. So what's before us right now is not the ballot return, correct? What it is the signatures to put it a petition to move forward.
It's both.
It's both, thank you.
It's the petition and the ballot.
So everything would be 50% is from 60 to 50.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. So we have an amendment on the floor from Mr. Yant to change the wording of ordinance 21091 from 70% to 50% rather than 60%. Ms. Bovee and Mr. Hale, did you get that amendment?
Yes, I understand.
Okay. Ms. Nowers?
Thank you. I was going to speak to the main motion, but I'll speak to the amendment too. I mean, it's onerous to get 70%, but it's also onerous to have your property taxed when you did not want it to be taxed. So I have an issue. I mean, I do think it should be a supermajority if you are going to tax people who say, I don't want it. And if you're doing 60-40, there might be 40% who really didn't want it. I think in most cases, you're looking at a 2/3 vote or 3/4 vote on things that you consider need a high majority. So I can't support anything, even though I sympathize with Ms. Alexander and being so close. I think a 2/3 amount is something that's required in a case where you are going to be taxing people who potentially don't want it. And it's incumbent on the people who want to see it happen to go out and rally their neighbors. If they're that close to 69%, bring it forward again, or 70%, they're at 69, bring it forward again and get that extra neighbor on. I don't have a problem with starting the process to 60%, but I have a problem lowering the vote below a 2/3 amount. I just don't think I think you need an extra level there in terms of approval from the people in the neighborhood.
Anybody else? Get pretty quiet.
Question. I call the question.
Can I say something first?
No.
Okay, he's called the question. I deserve that one. He's called the question, and so the vote is on the amendment. The amendment is to go from 70% to 50% in that last sentence. Any objection to the amendment? So Ms. Nauer has objected, so Madam Clerk, go ahead and do the vote, please.
Assemblymember Hale.
No.
Assemblymember Bovee.
No.
Mr. Mayor, it passed with Assemblymember Nowers, Bovee, and Hale opposed.
And I was going to say, until Mr. McKee blocked me totally, you do realize that the property values generally go up with, especially in natural gas areas and probably a paved road. Okay, Ms. Nowers.
That I absolutely do. And it would be great to have these go forward, but if you have 40% that are going to be taxed to pay for that improvement, you need to have them,
I didn't
on board.
want
So
to relitigate the issue, but Mr.
you
Summers.
brought it up.
Mr. Mayor, can I speak on that?
Mr. Mayor,
Second, Mr. Sumner's going to go, then you could go. Mr.
Some of us are elected with less than 50%, and we can stick a heck of a lot more taxes on folks than that. So,
There you go.
I mean,
Okay, now we're getting there. Mr. Hale, we got to move on. So just briefly, Mr. Hale.
yeah, just on the main motion here. I have to agree with Assemblymember Myers. I would support supermajority, but I know folks in my district would howl if you put would howl if I put an LID on them with only 50%. So yeah, I'm not going to be able to support that.
Okay, so the debate's on the ordinance now on 50, which is 50%. Any further discussion? Ms. Nowers?
I just want to get a last word. I think we're going to have people coming back here who are in the 50% that didn't want this if we pass this. So I urge you to vote against it.
Any further discussion? Okay, is there objection to pass on the ordinance that's been reduced to 50%? There is objection, so Ms. Nowers has objected, so go ahead and vote, Madam Clerk.
Assemblymember Bovee.
Yes.
Assemblymember Hale.
No.
Mr. Mayor, it did pass with Assemblymember Nowers and Hale opposed.
Okay, let's move on to ordinance 21093 and resolution 21092.
An ordinance accepting and appropriating $299,991 in fiscal year 2022 Community Assistance Program funding with accompanying resolution 21092, a resolution approving the scope of work and budget for the Community Assistance Program and authorizing the manager to enter into agreements with 19 unincorporated communities within the borough. If you're on the phone and would like to speak to this, press *3.
Okay, Ms. Heindel's got our staff report.
Through the mayor to the assembly. This is our community assistance money that we get annually that benefits the local community councils. This year, we changed the process. In the past, we had included every active community council. The process is now, which is more reflective of what's done statewide, is they have to apply for the money ahead of time, and only those that apply are part of this process. The amount you see before you includes all of those community councils that applied for this money, and this is what the state's providing to us.
So how much is it per community council?
It is $15,789.
For the 19, okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay. I will open the public hearing at this time. No sign-up list. Anybody in the audience wish to speak to this ordinance? Pass through money to the community councils? Any telephonics? Okay, so I'll close the public hearing. I guess, Ms. Nowers, could you move this for us, please?
I move to adopt ordinance 21-093 and resolution 21-092.
Any discussion? Any objection to passing the ordinance and resolution? Mr. Hale, Ms. Bovee, any objection?
No objection.
Okay, So that ordinance passes unanimously. Madam Clerk, ordinance 21094 and resolution 21094.
An ordinance accepting and appropriating additional funds in the amount of $429,076 for the Borough Fish Passage 2025 Grant Revision Number 1 to design and construct fish passage culvert replacements and use matching funds of $122,980 from the fiscal year 2020 Fish Passage Project and $117,020 from the grant match for the Fish Passage projects fiscal year 2021 with accompanying resolution 21094, a resolution approving the scope of work and budgets for the Borough Fish Passage 2025 project to design and construct fish passage culvert replacements. I apologize, Mr. Mayor.
We were talking about this ahead of time. She had to say the fish passage 7 times. So staff report, Mr. Dolan.
Terry Dolan, Director of Public Works. This is grant money from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's a good match. It's about 35% of the project total, which is a much smaller match than we've seen in recent years. And it's just a continuation of our fish passage program.
Good job. Thank you. Okay, I'll open the public hearing. I don't believe there's a sign-up list. Anybody in the audience wish to speak to this fish passage program? Any telephonics? Nothing on fish passage? Can't believe this. All right, I'll close the public hearing. Ms. Nowers.
I move to adopt ordinance 21-094 and resolution 21-094.
Okay, any discussion? Mr. McKee, go ahead, please.
Look, I think I have a problem with this in a couple of respects. First of all, we're taking money to go back and do something we should have done originally, right? So why are we doing that? Are we holding people accountable for what we didn't do in the past? If you put a culvert in that the fish can't pass through, then maybe we ought to look at the borough people that did that. Wouldn't you say that's fair, Mayor?
I'd say that was a suggestion.
So if we do that, okay, really what this is, and by the way, this is going to call, some people are going to fall out of their chairs. I'm a conservationist. I'm a hunter. I'm a fisherman, okay? And this does nothing for salmon, zero, okay? Look, I don't see, if we're going to pass this and we're going to spend $500,000 on this, why don't we have somebody up here who is a fisheries biologist saying this is essential? We don't. What this is, it makes everybody feel good. I'm against it. Okay, for that reason.
Okay. Mr. Sumner, then Ms. Nowers' lights on. But
Well, I guess through the mayor to Mr. McKee, I might also say, point out that this could potentially, in a lot of scenarios, help prevent road flooding during melt off too, or flooding over the road. But a lot of these old culverts were put in like in the 70s and 80s. I mean, I don't know who at this point we would hold accountable. I don't think anybody can build a passage over and drawn, a fish bearing stream and just put in a 12-inch culvert anymore. But as far as going after folks from 40 years ago, I think that'd be pretty difficult. So.
No. Mr. Two is ahead of you.
Okay.
Mr. Two?
I was just wondering if we could have Mr. Dolan come up and talk a little bit more about the actual process of these culverts, that they're not really replacing fish culverts, they're replacing just drainage culverts and transfer them into a fish culvert.
Yeah, Mr. Dolan, it's a good point.
Terry Dolan, Director of Public Works. So generally that's the case. The culverts that we are replacing are barriers to fish passage, and we're replacing them with culverts that are designed to encourage passage both directions. There's a whole bunch of wildlife biologists that we've had in the assembly chambers before. I don't think we've had them in here since Mr. McKee's been here to talk about this program. If it's something that the assembly's interested in, we could ask U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to come and talk about this program and the effect that it has. But we've been doing it for a long time. I like it because it does reduce the risk of losing a roadway during a flood. Lots of culverts that were installed in the 70s and 80s were undersized, and they result in flooding. And when we replace these culverts, we replace them with a culvert that can handle a 100-year flood. So there's some goodness that comes out of this in terms of road protection as well as fish passage.
Mr. Yount and Mr. Sumner.
I fully support this for that reason. Engineering came a long way since the 70s and 80s, and we do need bigger culverts in a lot of locations. And I don't personally, I like to catch fish and eat them, but I don't understand how they operate very well. If you guys ever could get a biologist in here to explain that to us, that'd be awesome. With that being said, I support this regardless, but if we could do that, that'd be great. Thanks.
Okay, we'll do this. Mr. Sumner.
Through the mayor to Mr. Dolan, I actually just had kind of a only slightly related question. That, like a couple of weeks ago, was that a 10-year rainfall event, or do you know? I mean, when we had all that rain?
I do not know how it measured up.
All right.
Well, Mr. McKee did have his hand up earlier. Did you want to jump in here? You okay? Ms. Nowers.
Look, Mayor, the problem I have with this, okay, is that we say no one is responsible for doing what is right, okay? Whether it's the contractor, whether it is a borough. How in the world could the borough have approved a road that would not have I don't care if it was 40 years ago. 40 years ago, I was up to my hips, by the way, bailing salmon fry out of where they couldn't get back into the Chena River. So I don't want to hear that garbage, okay? The government employees have a responsibility to be current, to in fact look out for the environment. And if they don't do it, why are we just keep throwing money at this?
Well, I'll answer that. You know, one of the biggest political things we worry about with salmon is from the Kenai area, from the Cook Inlet area, is we don't take care of our environment. We don't allow fish to get back into their streams and resources, and these culverts have been one of the biggest problems. And so the national government, when we go out there, Mrs. Propus has been with, we meet with Fish and Game right in their offices. We're kind of the poster child of this program because we've been trying to renovate something that didn't work many years ago. And I agree with you, the culverts sucked, years ago. They didn't work. They blocked salmon. But it's our responsibility to make that change now. And this is the help from the federal government to do that. And I'm 100% behind this program. I can tell you that right now. And so, yes.
I do not disagree with you to this extent. I would like to have a study by the Fish and Game of every one of these culverts that we're going to replace and what it's going to do to the salmon population. I would vote for that, okay? Where we're just saying, throw money at it. I'm not for that, okay? I want to have a biologist up there where I can ask him questions.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that question. I think if you should probably start attending the Fish Commission meetings and go routinely and regularly.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Hale, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just like to kind of weigh in a little bit here. Look, when these culverts were installed, nobody understood how they blocked fish passage. Nobody understood that the fish really cross through something that's small or dark. And what we're doing now is trying to fix with better science. We're trying to fix a problem that was created because we didn't understand the problem we were creating back then. And nobody understood it. Nobody understood. All across the nation, they were sticking these tiny little culverts in. And now we know better. And what we're trying to do is fix that.
Ms. Nowers? Then somebody needs to call a question.
Call a question.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, the question's been called. Madam Clerk, just go ahead and conduct a vote, because I think there is objection.
Assemblymember Hale, we're voting on the main motion.
Yes.
Assemblymember Bovee.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, it passed with Assemblymember McKee opposed.
Okay, where we at? 21, ordinance 21098. Madam Clerk?
An ordinance approving a one-year extension for the management agreement between the borough and the Chickaloon Village Traditional Council as the operator or on behalf of the borough for the Moose Creek Campground on state-owned land. If you're on the phone and would like to speak to this, press *3.
Who's doing the staff report? Okay, Mr. Phillips is here.
Eric Phillips, Community Development Director, through the mayor. The agreement in question here is a tri-party agreement between the borough, DNR, and the Chickaloon Village Traditional Council. And as such, all three have to agree on this agreement. And the agreement expires at the end of this month. Although we started working on this agreement this spring, DNR, as often the case, has been less than responsive. And so in light of the fact that the agreement's expiring at the end of this month, we want to just extend it a year to give us a chance to hopefully get DNR on board.
Okay, thank you. I'll open a public hearing at this time. I don't believe there's a sign-up list. Anybody in the audience wish to speak to this ordinance? One-year extension of the management agreement. Any telephonics? No telephonics, so I'll close the public hearing at this time. Assemblymember Hale, you're on telephonic. Can you move this for us?
Sir, I move to adopt the legislation as read into the record by the clerk.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? Any objection to pass in ordinance 21098? Ms. Nowers?
I have no objection to this. I'm just disappointed that we aren't able to get DNR to respond, and I'm not sure what needs to happen there, right? I just want to note that, and since there's somebody from the state sitting in the audience, maybe he can pull some strings there for us and get those responses.
Okay, go ahead, Mrs. Smolden.
Todd Smolden, Matsu Office of the Governor, through the Mayor, Assemblymember Nowers. I'm also disappointed to hear that that Mr. Phillips hasn't had a response from DNR on this. And I would just encourage all borough staff, assembly members, that if there is something that you are having a difficult time getting back from the state, please reach out to me. I'm happy to help in any way that I can.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Mr. Phillips and Mr. Manager, get Mr. Smolden the list. Thank you, but thank you for stepping forward, Mrs. Smolden. Appreciate that. Okay, anything further, Mr. Sumner?
I'd just like to add that he's not the only person that has difficulty getting responses from DNR. I think that's not uncommon. So they possibly the, oh, yeah.
I have business cards.
Yeah, you got a broad reach tonight, you know, being a doctor and now a facilitator or where civics teacher. Okay, any objection to pass in ordinance 21098? Mr. Hale, Ms. Bovee, any objection?
No objection.
Okay, so ordinance 21098 passes. We have reached audience participation time. This is your opportunity to speak to the assembly about any topic. If you're on the phone and would like to speak under audience participation, please hit *3. You will hear your hand has been raised. You have 3 minutes to testify. We do have a sign-up list. We'll start with Donna DeFusco.
Good evening. My name is Donna DeFusco. RS 2477 is found in the mining law of 1866. It is one sentence, and it says, "The right-of-way for the construction of highways over public lands not reserved for public uses is hereby granted." The law was repealed in 1976. For various reasons, the law is still being used today in Alaska. It's very confusing and has created a big dark cloud over a lot of real estate. The Iditarod Trail was originally built by the Alaska Road Commissions in sections over
restrictions to you. Fourth, and most importantly, over concern for other property owners that will be similarly situated, who must be aware that despite 14 separate official documents from the state of Alaska and the Mat-Su Borough, including this very body, specifically affirming that there were no new easements or rights of way across our property, they can change their mind at any time, and such agreements are not worth the paper they were printed on. We fully expect now that this case will be used to intimidate and bully landowners into surrendering their property to avoid the fate we have suffered. If you own property along this alleged route, or anywhere in the state for that matter, we cannot stress to you strongly enough to barricade your property against illegal trespassers, or you could very well be the next domino to fall. Last, it's abundantly clear that you have failed to do your due diligence prior to approving this project, and we now have decimated our property and our private property rights in the process. We can only hope that you will never allow this to happen again. We expect better from you.
Thank you. Okay, D. McKee.
Hi, I'm Dee McKee. I'm running for Assembly Seat 3 to replace the gentleman out there, hopefully. One of the things that I've been doing is going through the issues that the borough is involved in, and I came across, I was studying on the Port McKenzie, and I know we've got this grant coming in, and but I came across a report that I simply couldn't suppress. And I don't know whether I will be a hero or a villain. It's a lot safer when you're running for office to just sort of lay low and not stir up any controversy. But that is why I presented that memo and that report to you. Because I looked at it and I thought, geez Louise, are we really sure we want to do this? I'd really like the idea of a port, but I'm not sure the reality matches the idea. You get, I think, almost to the point of magical thinking. I teach middle school, and a little kid in 6th grade may say, well, if I just buy some shoes like LeBron James, maybe I can be a big basketball star. And that's magical thinking, because how's he going to get there? And this thing with the port's been going on for so many years. And when I read this particular report that I gave to you guys, I looked at it and I thought, a long time ago, the Temple report, I don't remember the rest of the name of the consultant, but said, this may not be a really good idea. But we went ahead with it anyway. And over all the years since then, we had poured money into this virtual money pit, and it's not going anywhere. They predicted, I think, the first 10 years we would lose about $70 million, and here we are. That started in 1999. Here we are all these years later, and it continues to lose money. And we just had the federal government say, but we're going to give you $7 million. And we're saying, oh, yes. But you're going to have to, there's a little price tag attached to the borough. I think it's $1.9 or $2 million. So we just keep throwing money at this thing. And I'm not sure that that's going to actually go anywhere, which doesn't mean that I'm against the project. But as I understand it, we've got a $200,000 appropriation for another, like a marketing analysis. Is this thing really going to fly? And if we build it, is it really going to go anywhere? Is it going to do anything for us? Or is it just something that we just really magically like to do? I can tell you, we lived in a house in Fairbanks, and there was kind of an ice lens at the end of the garage, and it kept sinking. We kept pouring rocks in it. And we go out 3 or 4 days later, and gee whiz, it was further down the hole, and we put more rocks in it. By the time we left there, the hole was still there at the end of the garage, and the rocks were going out of sight. And I just kind of think here with what we've got, I guess for me the issue is, we ought to wait until we at least see what this project, this consultant report is going to say to us before we proceed with tying our hands even further, incurring more expenses, because that report was a real eye-opener to me. And I'm just not sure in the long run, given some of the record of some of the things that the borough and the state has gone through over the years, they're big ticket items. I think we need to hold off on this a little bit. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any telephonics? Okay, we have a telephonic caller under audience participation, so go ahead, please. Welcome, Mr. Hale.
Kelly Dixon, DICKSON. Last week, Mr. Halter made a reference to our court case. However, he left out some pertinent details. During the trial, an Iditarod musher said, wherever snow falls in Alaska, mushers have the right of way, even on private property. Their unlimited greed is being fed by your support and reinforcement. Voters need to hold you all accountable for putting a tunnel under a rural dirt road while the obvious need is along the Connect Useful Road. The history expert the state presented at trial had a degree in the history of theology. That's religion, folks, not Alaskan history. But the judge, who was in an elected position, declared him an expert. The judge also witnessed the musher draw trail maps that showed the trail passing from 7 Mile Lake north of us along the Anna Lake Khyber Pass route. It favored our position. We then went into a short recess. Upon returning, the state's attorney asked if the musher could redraw his map, and the judge met him. She let a witness, who was obviously coached on break, draw a totally different map, which of course now showed a trail on our property. That was a pivotal moment when we realized that our search for justice and getting the Iditarod Trail in its accurate historical location was due to the greed of Iditarod mushers and a judge who was more interested in re-election votes than protecting Alaska's true history. The Federal Bureau of Land Management Iditarod National Historic Trail Comprehensive Plan maps show the Iditarod Trail passing north of us. The Alaska Road Commission maps show it north of us, in addition to other historical maps. And yet you have no conscience about crucifying innocent private property owners for a trail based on lies. Alaska State Land Survey 83001 had zero historic evidence attached to it. Zero. Alaskans deserve historically accurate trail locations. They also deserve honest politicians who work for all of the people. Private interest pawns need to be exposed and held accountable for their selfish and abusive agendas. You should be ashamed about bulldozing a family's homestead for nothing more than lies created to benefit Iditarod mushers and the manipulative quid pro quo relationships they have developed at the state and now local levels. All participants need to be held accountable for their destruction of Alaska's true historical records. The Iditarod Trail never crossed our property, and what you have done is an egregious abuse of power against private citizens, and it should haunt you for the rest of your lives. Thank you.
Okay, any other telephonics? Anybody in the audience wish to speak? Sir, come on forward, please. Welcome.
My name is FJ Kruger, live in District 3. I just wanted to speak real quick to Ordinance 21091 that passed tonight regarding the LIDs. When you guys put an at the table amendment like that, you don't give the public the opportunity to speak to those. Public comment had already passed on that. So you guys took what was already lowering it from 70 down to 60, which members of the public may have been okay with, and then changed it again on the spot without giving them the option to speak. I also wanted to speak that I personally believe it was a little improper for two of our assembly members to vote on this, given that they are real estate developers in the valley, and this could potentially personally benefit them. And given that they were the main sponsor of the original motion and then also the sponsor of the amendment. Again, not saying there's anything improper, but it does give the potential for people to think that. So thank you.
Anybody else? Any telephonics? Okay, we're going to close audience participation at this time. We'll go to the consent agenda, Madam Clerk. I don't believe there was anything pulled.
No, there wasn't, Mr. Mayor. Resolution 21098, a resolution amending the scope of work for the anticipated project income during fiscal year 2022 for the rail extension from Port McKenzie to the main line, adding payments of wages and benefits for an after-hours initial responder to emergencies occurring at Port McKenzie Rail Extension rental properties. Resolution 21099, a resolution amending the scope of work for fiscal year 2018 right-of-way acquisition project to include the purchase, maintenance, and/or repair of structures that the borough puts into place to secure the parcels for the project. AM 21087, request to vacate the existing 30-foot wide grant grant of easement for public roadway recorded at Book 17, page 35, on the northern boundary of parcel number 4, MSB waiver 7178, in the southeast quarter, northwest quarter, section 22, township 18 north, range 2 west, to be replaced by a 60-foot wide street, providing access to the subdivision and subdivisions to the west, an additional 60-foot wide right-of-way commencing at North Pittman Road, east to the northeast corner of the parcel will provide access to the parcel to the east. Located within section 22, township 18 north, range 2 west, Seward Meridian, lying south of the Little Susitna River and east and west of North Pittman Road. AM 21093, request to eliminate the existing 15-foot wide platted power line easement within tract 5-2 Springer Subdivision Number 2, plat number 67-1, located within section 17, township 17 north, range 2 east, Seward Meridian, lying east of the South Glen Highway and directly north of East Outer Springer Loop. AM 21094, awarded bid number 22044C to Hughes Fire Equipment in the contract amount of $684,418 to purchase a tactical tender. AM 21095, awarded bid number 22035C to Hughes Fire Equipment in the contract amount of $183,339 to purchase replacement brush 66 chassis. AM 21096, awarded bid number 22033B to Western Construction and Equipment, LLC, in a contract amount of $159,240 for the landlocked Avenue Road repairs. AM 21097, approval of contract amendment to contract number 21045C with P&D Engineers Incorporated, extending the project completion date to June 30th, 2022 for Port McKenzie Damage Repair and Construction Management Services Project. AM 21098, allocating 2024 Arctic Winter Game project funding in the amount of $200,000 and authorizing the manager to enter into an agreement with the 2024 Arctic Winter Game Host Society.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. Assemblywoman Nowers, could you move this, please?
Move to approve the consent agenda as read into the record by the clerk.
Any objection?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Look, the last one that was read here, the $200,000 for the Arctic Winter Games. My understanding was the state was going to kick in $2 million on that, okay? Have we seen any of those little green portraits of dead Yankee presidents that would take care of this, or what are we doing? Or is the borough going to finance the whole thing?
Okay. I'll let Mr. Manager jump in first, and I'll maybe respond to.
Through the mayor to Mr. McKee. The $200,000 is a portion of the $250,000 the assembly appropriated for this purpose. We have not received the grant agreement from the state. However, it has been appropriated and funded for the first $1 million of the $2 million tentatively committed to. The idea was $1 million this fiscal year, $500,000 next, and $500,000 the following year. So we are expecting a grant agreement from the state of Alaska for $1 million to support the 2024 Arctic Winter Games.
Hang on. Had I known what you were going to say, I would ask Mr. Smolden to talk to that tall guy down there and tell us when the $1 million is going to come.
Mr.
Okay?
Mr. Smolden, could you add this to your list, please? I think we've got this, by the way.
Approved and funded.
Okay, we've got this. We're good. Any objection to passing the consent agenda as read? I guess Mr. Hale's here. Ms. Bovee, any objection?
No objection.
Okay, consent agenda is approved as read. No unfinished business, no vetoes. There's, Madam Clerk, introductions.
Introduction for public hearing on October 5th, ordinance 21085, ordinance 21092, ordinance 21099 with accompanying resolution 21097. Introduction for public hearing on November 16th, ordinance 21095, ordinance 21096, and ordinance 21097.
Will I be around for November 16th?
You will, Mr. Mayor.
I will.
Be your last meeting.
Senator Nowers, could you move the introductions?
I move to introduce the legislation as read into the record by the clerk and set the public hearings for October 5th, 2021 and November 16th, 2021 respectively.
Okay, any objection? Hearing no objection, the introductions are approved or introduced. Vacancy report, Assemblywoman Nowers.
I move to confirm the mayor's recommendations as follows. Commissions on salaries and emoluments, Terry Boyle, and Library Board, Kathleen Shoup.
Any objection to the approving the vacancy report? Hearing none, that vacancy report is approved. No other new business, no referrals. The reconsideration was taken care of before Mr. McKee got here. It's time for reconsideration. Madam Clerk, please read the reconsideration into the record.
Ordinance 21088, an ordinance accepting and appropriating $7,590,192 in disaster supplement funds from the United States Economic Development Administration for the installation of pile sleeves on the deep draft dock and roll-on, roll-off cargo ramp at Port McKenzie with accompanying resolution 21088. A resolution approving the scope of work and budget for the United States Economic Development Administration disaster supplement funds.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. Okay, Mr. McKee, do you have a motion to reconsider?
I move to reconsider as read into the record by the Borough Clerk, and I would like to speak to it.
Okay.
I'd like some indulgence.
Okay, we're going to do that, but everybody understands this is a two-part thing. First, we're going to vote on the motion to reconsider.
I understand.
Do you want to speak to that?
I would.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Look, this is not something that I did in a lighthearted fashion. I don't know how many of the Assembly people up here have read all the consultants' reports that have been generated by the borough, about $500,000 worth over the since 2005. If you haven't, you should. All these reports said one thing, that the port was only viable if we had coal export from either Healy or the Wishbone, okay? Coal is a dying industry. There has been no coal sent out of the state of Alaska in over 4 years, okay? There's not going to be any sent out of the state of Alaska in another 14 years, okay? So what is going to make the port viable? Well, we don't know, because the Borough Assembly has never sat down and gone out and looked for a marketing outfit at an international level that would look at our port. First of all, we don't have a port. We have 2 docks, by the way. We don't have a port. And they would say, what are we marketing? What are we marketing, folks? We have before us the motion I asked for reconsideration, and what really stopped me in my tracks was, if we accept this, we are saying we are going to continue to throw money at the port for the next 15 years, okay? On this thing, what we have is not just a grant of $700 million from the feds. We only get that grant if we agree to soak the local taxpayers for $1.9 million. If we don't pony up that money, we don't get the $7 million. Okay, so Mayor,
I need to have the Assembly decide whether or not they want to reconsider this
Okay,
issue. And
do
then
that.
You could have at it, So there is a motion to reconsider ordinance 21088 and resolution 21088, which is appropriating $7,590,000 that we know is going to go to the sleeves. Is there objection to reconsidering? Ms. Bovee, any objection to reconsidering?
Yes.
Okay, so Madam Clerk, you got the Assembly, go ahead and vote on whether to reconsider or not.
Assemblymember Bovee.
No.
Mr. Mayor, the motion to reconsider failed with Assemblymember Sumner, 2, and McKee in support.
Okay, so that's all for that. Okay, we're at comments. Let's start with staff. Mr. Spropoulos, any further comments?
Looks like while we were in the meeting here, the Elastica Redistricting Board posted their updated maps numbers 3 and 4. 3 looks kind of close to what we submitted. 4 does not. It includes a western district that includes Valdez, keeps going outside the borough. So there'll be more to come on that, I'm sure.
Okay, Mr. Manager, comments?
Nothing further, Mr. Mayor.
Madam Clerk? Assemblywoman Bovee, why don't you go ahead since you're telephonic?
No comment, thank you.
Mr. Sumner?
Yeah, I'd like to address the gentleman running for Assembly District 3 who has impugned my motives. I have never used an LID to do any property development. I've actually never done an LID. So, yeah, I mean, to my recollection, I might have been mailed a ballot at one point, but I've never been the one that did one. So I really don't know any developer that would go about things that way, so.
Okay, Ms. Nowers?
Yeah, I have a few things I want to talk about. Mostly the mayor stole my thunder on the Matsu salmon issue on the culverts, because I totally agree. Most of what you said was exactly what I was thinking. You know, we have a really good Fish and Wildlife Commission. We've talked about how important fisheries are to the economy out here. And that was one of the things that I just loved about the valley when I came here. One of the first things I did was catch a fish in the Little Sioux. I had no idea what I was doing. At the time, I believe the limit was 6 for silvers. Now it's down to 2. And if you listen to people who are way more expert than me, there's that life cycle. You know, they got to be able to get back. They got to lay eggs. You got the fry, you got the smolt. They got to get to the ocean. They got to survive the ocean. So anywhere along the line, if you screw up that chain, you don't have fish. So, you know, we should never destroy the habitat in the first place. Maybe we should be doing more to look at our habitat. I mean, we're working that way, but it's taken us a long time to figure out, like, we destroy things and then we come back and fix it. It's super expensive and we really don't do it as well as nature does. We're not very good at that. So I'm glad we passed that. You know, on the LIDs, I think we're going to have communities come forward and you're going to have actually a fair number of people who don't want it in their neighborhood and they're going to not have a say on it. So I just say that from the standpoint of maybe some of the folks who support it will reconsider in the spirit of letting those people who might not have supported a 50% have a chance to have their say if they do want to have their say. You know, on the port, Mr. McKee, you know, I think there's some really good points there on how much has been spent on that. And the problem is in business, there's something called sunk cost. You can't get it back. You can't make your future decision based on that sunk cost. You can only make it based on where you're at. And so, you know, I think the flip side of the coin of what you're talking about is if we don't protect that asset and put some protection on that, then we've lost the ability of using that asset. We've allowed it to degrade. So I guess that's just, you know, for what it's worth, that's the flip side I'm looking at on that particular issue. I got 2 more things. You know, asking DHSS to come, I'm not opposed to that. I just note that those people have been running full speed and they've made themselves available in a lot of places. There's every Wednesday online, they have a public health echo and they have Dr. Zink, Dr. McLaughlin, huge number of people, and you can ask questions and they go over all the data. So I just suggest to assembly members that that's an option. That's every Wednesday at noon. Also, the school district 2 weeks ago, it was the meeting right before our joint meeting. They had a very comprehensive presentation that went over a lot of the data. So I know we're all trying to sort through that, and you know, we all been christened doctors, I guess, during this pandemic. I don't consider myself a health expert at all, but I've been trying to follow those, and I know those are out there. I would ask for our next meeting, if there's time, maybe to direct the manager to get somebody from the Department of Labor or maybe ICER in front of us, maybe Musin Gutabi, if he hasn't left yet, or Neil Freed, to talk about where we're at economically with, unemployment in the valley, evictions. They've had some really good data out there. So if it doesn't overload our meeting. Anyways, recommend that. And then I hope the clerk never has to say fish passage again, or not very much. So thank you.
Mr. Yount?
Those are big shoes to follow there. Great job, Stephanie. So, first to Mr. McKee, I see the spirit of where you're coming from on that. And, there's a big part of me right now that regrets that I didn't let it come to reconsideration so that we could have more debate. So I want to speak to that. But, in the last 10 years, we just got our census report. 18,000 of the 23,000 people that moved to Alaska were here in the borough. We're talking about a little over 3/4 of the growth for the entire states right here in this tiny community. And so, and that's not going to change. We know that. We just know it's not going to change. It can't. So it's tough, when you own something, you need to maintain it. Being on the Port Commission, I've become pretty intimate with this lately. It's, there's no debating. It's by far the most valuable piece of property in the borough. If you put it out to market and somebody in the private industry would pay well for it. I think there's potential. We may want to look at someday possibly putting out an RFP and entertaining, people who manage these things worldwide, giving us an RFP. On this, but we do have good meetings going. Ms. Dolan and I have taken some good ones lately. I'm not a study guy. I said that when I supported that night. I'm not a real big fan of studies. I'm a real big fan of handshakes. I've been calling people that dock in Anchorage and asking them to come here and meet with Ms. Dolan and I, right? That's how you get business. You shake hands. And so with that being said, to let it go to waste right now, I think would be a horrible idea. The growth is not going to stop. We are going to need to have that as an operational piece of property in the future. So that's why I didn't support the reconsideration. But you did bring up a lot of great points, and I appreciate that. So on the LID, I really appreciate your comment. I do. Those actually hurt me big time as a developer. So any developer developing today has natural gas. Over 90% of subdivisions do, way over. More than half are doing paved roads now. Those take away my competitive advantage. So I recently brought forth a gravel tax that we shelved for a little while here while we work with private industry. That again, Mr. Sumner and I are going to be two of the biggest payers of the gravel tax. So I didn't do it because I'm trying to harm us. I did it because I actually think it's the right thing to do, right? If we do pass a gravel tax eventually, people using it need to pay. And I'm one of those users. Jesse's one of those users. So I don't think either one of us ran to try to benefit ourselves up here. I can tell you this cost me a lot of time and time's money in my life. So I did it because I don't want to turn into a cesspool like Anchorage. So you can put that on the record. So those LIDs hurt me competitively. They take away my market advantages. And if you want to know how hard it is to get somebody to sign something and vote, look at our voter turnout. Our voter turnout is disgustingly low. So when you get 50%, if it was only 50% of the ballots returned, that'd be concerning to me. But it's, you're getting 50% of the overall number when a lot of them don't get returned, right? And so I can tell you finances is my big, that's my area of expertise. I was recently on the board for Alaska Housing Finance Corporation. I don't like that we have any money in the bond market. I whine about that up here. I don't like some of our investment strategy for them. I want to invest in ourselves, right? The return on investment is drastically higher. I'm glad that we're no longer partnering with Wells Fargo on this LID program. I understand it pretty well. I'm glad that we're actually funding that ourselves. Because I can show you, if you want to look at investment strategy, our return on investments is off the charts higher on this LID program than it is with many of our other cash holding programs, right? So again, like I said, I just really wanted to reiterate that this LID program actually hurts me competitively, just like the gravel tax would, and I still very well may bring it forward again when I work through the bugs. So yeah, that's all I got. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. McKee, comments?
Yeah, I do. Look, I don't want to see the port shut down. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it a viable part of the transportation system? And we won't know that until we get a marketing report. So why are we going to throw $10 million into something that may or may not be viable? There's nobody up here sitting on this dais in their right mind would take their personal money and invest it that way. None of you would ever convince me of that. Okay, so all I'm saying is if we get the $10 million, I think we ought to put it in the bank and not do a blinking thing with until we get the report back. And if it says the port is magical thinking, then we send the money back to the feds, put the $1.9 million back in the bank here. The port is right now a turkey. There is no customers for the port. None. I have talked to the manager. He is working night and day. He would sell half the assembly to get customers out there. Right now, we don't have it. We have to know if it's there. Okay? One of the things that I'm going to go back to it. Remember, if you look at all the consultant reports, okay, look, consultants have in common one thing with attorneys, consultants, and prostitutes. They will tell you anything you want if you give them the right amount of money, okay? And that is what has happened with the borough, okay? I might add, sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between the three, okay? But anyway, you have to look at these things and say, why are we doing it? Coal is dead, folks. There is no coal going out of here. Our coal is not good quality coal. It's the only bituminous coal in the entire state of Alaska is 40 miles south of Cordova. Okay, that's a fact. If you go and you look, that's what they'll tell you. Okay, that is world-class coal. Anything else is garbage. Okay, so all I wanted to see was us to put a halt on things until we saw whether we have a project or not. Put $9 million worth of sleeves on and then if they say it doesn't work, then we got to take out $9 million worth of sleeves before we take the rest of the port out. Nothing makes sense to me on this thing. I'm sorry, it doesn't. Okay. The other is, I want to see the state, they've committed to giving the borough. Remember, I'm the only person on this assembly that's voted against the Arctic Winter Games because I don't trust the state. And anybody in here that does, okay, I got a theory I want to sell you, okay? That they haven't come up with a darn nickel on this thing. But the manager says we need $200,000. I want that tall drink of water down in Juneau to come up with a few bucks. That's all. Thanks.
Prostitutes, propolis, do you want to rebuttal?
Great. I hope the frontiersman isn't here. I'm going to miss you, George.
Good. Mr. Two, comments?
I'm going to pass for tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Hale?
I'm good, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. I guess Ms. Bovee was called on earlier, so Mr. McKee, you and I are termed out, and I will dearly miss your passion. And I'll miss seeing you every 2 weeks and having a chance to debate with you on various issues so good luck after we leave. But I will say this, and Tracy, thank you for coming in and giving us such a wonderful report. And it's always valuable and it's always comprehensive and it's always professional. We really do appreciate it, so thank you. And I could tell the Assembly, you rest assured, on the Burma Road crossing, there are thousands of snow machiners are going to utilize that. There's going to be hundreds and hundreds of skiers and bikers and on the Iditarod Trail. And, the benefit to the state of Alaska and the benefit to the Mat-Su Borough to have that trail finally recognized and litigated, the exact route by the court, I guess it's will never be acceptable to you, but that's what we have courts for. And there's a reason. You people sued DNR. Nobody sued you. And I will talk about RS-2477s. I'm not an expert in it, but like the Willow Creek Sled Trail, which runs from Connect, crosses up by Houston, that part's gone. But the trail going past Houston up into Hatcher Pass, that's an RS-2477 and it's trail conditions. And, I have an easement from MEA on both sides of a 3-acre lot. And I don't really like it either. And, there's some easements that are not fun for people, but there's an easement through your property and that was litigated. There's an easement through Dixon's property and that was litigated. And so the trail was blocked in 1982. And so it is going up and going over. And I'm sorry about that, but that's what we have courts for. And I am very proud to have helped a little bit with the Assembly to put this crossing in because somebody's going to get killed there. It's as simple as that. And to see the Iditarod race and other things going out there, the Connect 200 and all these sports, motorbike, and I hope the Iron Dog will use it also. It's a big thing for the borough and it's a big thing for the state of Alaska. And that's all I have to say on that. I wish Mr. Smolden, he left, but if you're listening, Mr. Smolden, thank you for always coming and talking to us. And tonight was especially exceptional. You're telling us about COVID and how that is affecting us. So anyway, we will, I guess, adjourn at exactly 8 p.m. And so